Are we to keep the people of India ignorant in order that we may keep them submissive? Or do we think that we can give them knowledge without awakening ambition? Or do we mean to awaken ambition and to provide it with no legitimate vent? Who will answer any of these questions in the affirmative? Yet one of them must be answered in the affirmative, by every person who maintains that we ought permanently to exclude the natives from high office. I have no fears. The path of duty is plain before us, and it is also the path of wisdom, of national prosperity, of national honor. All parties seem to be agreed upon one point, that the dialects commonly spoken among the natives in this part of India contain neither literary nor scientific information, and are moreover so poor and rude that until they are enriched from some other quarter, it will not be easy to translate any valuable work into them. It seems to be admitted on all sides that the intellectual improvement of those classes of the people who have the means of pursuing higher studies can at present be effected only by means of some language not vernacular amongst them. What then shall that language be? One half of the committee maintain that it should be the English. The other half strongly recommend the Arabic and Sanskrit. The whole question seems to me to be which language is best worth knowing. I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic, but I have done what I could to form a correct estimate of their value. I have read translations of the most celebrated Arabic and Sanskrit works. I have conversed both here and at home with men distinguished by their proficiency in the Eastern tongues, and I am quite ready to make the Oriental learning at the valuation of the Orientalists themselves. I have never found one among them who could deny that a single shelf of good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. The intrinsic superiority of the Western literature is, indeed, fully admitted by those members of the committee who support the Oriental. And I certainly never met with an Orientalist who ventured to maintain that the Arabic and Sanskrit poetry could be compared to that of the great European nations. But when we pass from works of imagination to works in which facts are recorded, the general principles investigated, the superiority of the Europeans becomes absolutely immeasurable. It is, I believe, no exaggeration to say that all the historical information which has been collected from all the books written in the Sanskrit language is less valuable than that may be found in the most paltry abridgments used at preparatory schools in England. In every branch of physical or moral philosophy, whether we look at the intrinsic value of our literature or at the particular situation of this country, we shall see the strongest reason to think that of all foreign tongues, the English tongue is that which would be the most useful to our native subjects. I feel with them that it is impossible for us, with our limited means, to attempt to educate the body of the people. We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. That's trash. That came from Thomas Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education from 1835. So who is Thomas Macaulay and the East India Trading Company, and how were missionaries involved in this system of education? Well, all of this begins before Macaulay, back in 1757, when England officially colonized India. It wasn't until 1834, when Macaulay became Supreme Counsel for India, that this idea of education in India in English took shape. So the East India Trading Company actually had a great big stake in keeping the majority of the population uneducated, because they were opening up opium factories all across the land, and they needed laborers for those factories. In Macaulay's 4 years as serving as Supreme Counsel for India, he didn't learn the language or the culture, understand the people that he was working with. And by Macaulay only wanting to educate the rich and the wealthy and those who were already in government positions, It means that they were able to maintain control of India through intermediaries. And they could take a hands-off approach to governing an entire nation. So, how do missionaries get involved in this? Well, as ambassadors of Britain, they taught the language, they taught the culture, they were able to take Western ideas and solidify them into the thoughts of Indians. Overall, missionaries became unintended collaborators of Britain and Macaulay's ideas, which were essentially self-seeking and imperialistic. So, what was Macaulay arguing for? Well, he was arguing that the Indian people's religion should be Christianity, their language should be English, their culture should be Western, and that the class that he was working with should only be the elite and the wealthy. This was done at the behest of Britain's own wealth and vast empire, but at the expense of Indian culture and Indian language, the Indian people, Jesus' kingdom, and biblical justice. So, what would Jesus have to say about those things? About religion and language and culture? What did he say about wealth? And what were his views on empire? When he brought the kingdom to earth, it was at his own expense. And what do we know that the Bible says about justice? During a prayer meeting, we were actually told by one of our friends who comes from India. He had something to say that really struck our hearts. And he said, "Your people brought your language, your education system, your religion, but you didn't bring your Jesus." As teachers, we need to tread carefully. We need to understand that the footprints that have gone before us have not always been those whose intentions and interests were aligned with the kingdom. Jesus' way of teaching, the value he placed in people, and the beauty he saw in his creation, which includes different cultures, were in direct contrast to Macaulay's views. So, where do we go from here? We know we can't walk in the footprints of Macaulay, and Jesus was so good to actually leave us a clear path to follow. He was intentional with each person, developing relationships by asking questions. He was good at seeing people as a whole person. We need to do the same in our classrooms. Setting aside time to understand who our students are, their needs, the fact that we can identify those places of hurt and actually bring healing to them. Friends, we need to have his perspective. We need to follow his lead as a teacher. The goal of our upcoming lessons is the topic of student needs. We need to have a more complete perspective and understanding of our students. We need to see them as they truly are, not as barbarians needing a new language and culture, but as his people, full of beauty and complexity and enormous capacity for creativity and greatness. All on their own, without our help. We can wrestle back and forth with this role as modern-day missionaries and as English teachers. But the one thing we must get right is their value and complexity as people, their place in his kingdom. Are we going to be citizens of an empire or citizens of hope? Being ambassadors for Jesus and his kingdom and his style of teaching. This will make us better teachers, better leaders in the area of education. And my friends, we need to be leading out in education. and a new way of doing things, and calling people to stand at their full height. And what that means is us seeking information about our students so that we can understand them, so that we can develop lessons according to what they need and not what we think they need. And by doing that, we will be bringing healing and reconciliation to our classrooms. Created opium factories.
Just get messed up and name it the same trading company, so we'll just try that now.
Oh my goodness.
High-tech piece of machinery.
Jeez Louise.
It has needs.
Not gonna do it again.